Our movie begins in a dark location, with the camera capturing a ragged-looking man carrying a female. His rage and dissatisfaction may be seen in his expressions. He stole her after lingering for a while. After a little moment, the freak begins pulling her clothes off and raping her. The girl hits his face and pushes it away, but the guy smacks her hard. The screen goes black. It's currently 6 a.m. The scene transitions to a girl waking up in the morning and going through her typical morning routine as she prepares herself. The scene shifts to another man on his way home from work, while the girl cooks breakfast in the house. He gets in the car. The man starts driving and sends a text to his girlfriend, whose face lights up with joy as she receives it. Meanwhile, the guy shows up at her house and lights up a cigarette, but as soon as she walks out the door, he throws it away. After that, he assists her in loading the luggage into the car, and the girl meets him and serves him breakfast as they sit inside. Before they leave on their excursion, he savors it and the girl admires him. They leave for the tour after the guy changes out of his work suit into a more casual outfit. They pass across towns and highways on their way to the suburbs and meadows. They both appreciate the feel of the road and the beauty of the scenery. Claire, the girl, tells her boyfriend about her pregnant pal during the drive. Dean attempts to determine whether Claire is pregnant, but she just denies it, prompting Dean to exhale a breath of relief and declare that he does not want children. Claire's face darkens, but she tries to divert the subject by saying, of course, she just got enrolled in, but Dean refuses to let her go. Dean admonishes the states that he doesn't want to talk about it because it spoils both of their emotions. The rest of the drive is silent until they arrive at a market. Claire enters the market to get the snacks and returns smiling. As a result, they resume their trip, but this time in a more upbeat mood. Their trip eventually leads them to a town where Dean appears to be lost. Claire makes fun of him, but he refuses to confess he's lost. They eventually come across a gas station. As Dean fills up the car with gas, Claire moves closer to the restroom. She returns after a bit and sits in the vacant car. However, a solemn-looking man approaches the window and requests a lighter. She claims she does not smoke, but the man insists on using the car's lighter. The forced entry irritates Air, who attempts to get him to go, but the man bangs on the window and threatens Claire. Dean emerges out of nowhere and hands him the lighter. While looking at Claire, he lights up the cigarette and returns it to Dean. Regardless, they exit the station while the man confers with a companion. Meanwhile, Claire expresses her displeasure with Dean's treatment of the creep. Dean resumes the drive, saying, "You shouldn't tamper with such folks." They arrive at the motel after some time and proceed inside. Dean falls asleep on the bed and invites Claire over, and they melt into one another. Dean comes the next morning with breakfast, which Claire joyfully consumes, and drinks with coffee. When Dean suggests going for a walk, Claire jumps for joy as they leave the motel. The roads take the turns to an open, secluded area, and in the middle of nowhere, they see a car parked beside the road with its hood open. To assist, Dean parks his own car close beside it. However, it is revealed that the creep from the petrol station is the one whose car has broken down. Claire is immediately alerted and pushes Dean to leave right away. Despite Dean's insistence on assisting, Claire yells at him, accusing him of threatening her. Dean's face immediately shows signs of alarm, and he swerves the car around, leaving the man dangling. They get to the hill forest after some time, and the couple begins their journey. They travel through the beautiful forest, take pictures, and tenderly embrace each other on their way to the top. They sit together on the summit, enjoying the strong and fresh gusts of wind blowing over their hair. They decide to leave after spending some time there and return to their hotel room on their way back. Dean's car begins to overheat, so he pulls over to the side and inspects the radiator. He takes the coolant and fills the car after discovering it is empty. However, there is a leak underneath the radiator. Dean spots another car coming down the road and parks behind them as he hunkers down. Dean is approached by a large man who inquires about the problem. When the hoodlum from the gas station approaches Dean, he claims that he is only replenishing the coolant. Dean declares that he does not want any trouble, but the man begins to trash speak him. Meanwhile, a third man knocks on Claire's door, and she immediately knows the bald man, sending shivers up her spine outside. The man abuses Claire as the trash talking grows. Dean gets enraged, and a fight ensues when he strikes a tremendous blow in the man's face. While Dean fights with the other two, one ginger-haired guy drags Claire outdoors. He manages to free himself and rushes to Claire's help, but the ginger grabs him and shoves him into the car. Dean takes a glass bottle and slams it on Ginger's head, knocking him out. Dean, distraught and flustered, tells Claire to get back in the car right now, and they leave right away. Unfortunately, the devil does not abandon them, and the man in the automobile begins to pursue them. As the thug approaches, terror creeps up their spines, and Dean notices the car's engine overheating once more. Regardless, He stomps on the gas pedal and speeds forward. They are pursuing her. The guy follows them all the way from the freeway to the residential trails. Dean manages to avoid him for a little while. As their cars race ahead, Dean notices a side area and swerves the car sharply to the right, allowing them to elude their pursuers. The couple breathes a sigh of relief, but the bandit approaches them from another direction, and the chase resumes. Dean's car eventually overheats and slows down until the ruffian approaches them. Dean's car is catapulted into the air, rolls many times, and ends up upside down as a result of their collision. Claire wakes up seriously hurt and finds Dean unconscious after the dust settles. The man appears from behind and takes Claire away, screaming at the top of her lungs. Both of them wake up bound in the back of the car after a blackout. Claire whimpers, terrified and in pain, as Dean tries to comfort her. She refuses to listen and continues to wail. After fondling through the tools, Dean manages to get her to approach the toolbox on the edge. Dean holds an iron cutter in his hands and encourages her to sever her ties. The car suddenly comes to a halt, and the goons drag them out. While Dean is carried into a wooden shed, the big guy picks Claire up and places her over his shoulder. Both of them are bound to the poles, and Dean's neck is wrapped in barbed wire by the gingerhead. Meanwhile, Claire Creeps approaches her and trails the knife across her stomach. The couple's cries echo around the shed, but the thug's cruelty continues as Dean's neck begins to bleed. They torture him by squeezing his face with a handkerchief and pouring water on him. He becomes breathless, and the leader strangles him. After a while, he tells the others to disconnect him, while Gerard, the ginger guy, removes his iron wire. Heath, the big guy, approaches Claire, whose position is worse by the minute. Gerard, on the other hand, ties Dean up and lifts him up with a hook till he is hanging upside down. Then the beating begins, with everyone landing punches on his stomach until his mouth begins to bleed. Meanwhile, Claire manages to release herself from the bonds and flees from behind, helplessly watching her boyfriend be beaten mercilessly. The thugs suddenly realize she's gotten away and rush outside to find her. Heath is instructed to look about while Gerard dashes inside to retrieve his firearm. In the meantime, the camera pans to Claire, who's hiding behind cars and other stuff, while Heath and the others hunt for her. She goes from place to place and hides until Jared notices her through the sight of his gun and fires at her. Following that, he announces her location, and everyone begins chasing her. He finally gets up to her, but she cuts him off and dashes across a barbed fence to a car. As she locks it, the guy is all around her. Claire screams in terror and tries to start the car, but the pig chuckles and tells her to do whatever she wants. Unfortunately, the car is a manual, and Claire is unable to drive it, leaving her powerless inside. While Dean is being dragged outside, the hoodlum orders Jerry to bring him out. Claire receives the order to come out on the count of 3 after Jared places a knife to his throat. Helpless and terrified, they are dragged back into the shed after she staggers out. They strap Dean once more inside. While Claire was raped by Heath at the pole, and Dean stood there in agony and desperation. His rage allows him to break free from the ropes in one swift motion. He takes up a rod and uses a powerful blow to knock Heath out. After that, he holds. Claire hides her while she vomits and squeals in pain. Dean calms her and drags her outdoors, where they successfully exit the shed and sprint to the car. However, Jared notices them in his scope and begins firing. Dean manages to start the car just in time and drive away from the junkyard. Both of them breathe a sigh of relief, but Claire gets wounded in the side and her stomach is bleeding profusely as Dean notices her wound. He pulls over to the side of the road and takes her outside, where she bleeds out and dies in his arms. Dean must be devastated and broken. He drives back to the junkyard as his rage for vengeance begins to boil over. He pulls up to a safe distance and runs up to the location, brandishing a knife. Meanwhile, Jared is seen working on a car when Dean reads him from the side and attacks him. He starts it and sits in the driver's seat. Jared tries to choke him with the seatbelt during their quarrel. Dean, on the other hand, thrusts the dagger into his thigh. Dean drops outside the car as the struggle continues. Just as Jared begins to crawl outside, Dean slams the car door shut on his face, rendering him lifeless. Meanwhile, Heath is searching for his friend and discovers him dead. When his buddy joins him outdoors, they realize Dean has returned. They are both on the lookout for him. Dean snatches a shovel from behind and hacks his leg out. Dean beats his head into a pulp after the fatty falls to the ground. He then takes the knife and proceeds to the shed, where the leader is already waiting. Dean charges at the crazy as he begins to laugh menacingly. The struggle begins with the lunatic overwhelming Dean, but he manages to break free after striking him with a powerful ion pivot. After that, he climbs onto his chest and lands punch after punch on his face until the man is a bloody mess with broken bones and collapses. Dean links an iron chain around his feet and drags him away from the hook. The movie comes to a close with Dean hanging up on him and leaving him there. He staggers softly out of the shed after that. The movie's weariness comes to an end with this scene. We hope that you enjoy your time and have a good day.